The blue and red lights bounced against the quiet wooden fence of the ranch, their harsh glare cutting through the peaceful evening like broken glass. Marcus stood there, his hands in the air, his chest rising and falling slowly, not because he was guilty of anything, but because he knew all too well how these situations could turn dangerous. His boots were still covered in the dust of his long drive home, his leather duffel resting by his feet, and across the gravel driveway, standing smugly with folded arms, was the woman who had called them, the whole president, known in the neighborhood as Karen. "There he is, officers," Karen said, her voice high-pitched and self-satisfied. "Trespassing on property he doesn't belong to. I told you he was trouble the moment he pulled up." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't lower his eyes. But inside, there was a heaviness, the kind that comes when you're accused of being a criminal for simply existing. "Sir, do you live here?" one of the cops asked, hand resting close to his holster. Marcus paused, letting the silence hang for just a moment. "This is my ranch," he said finally, his voice steady, low, the kind that carried weight without raising itself. Karen scoffed. "His ranch? Please. Do you see the car he's driving? That beat-up truck? This is a gated community. We have rules, standards. He doesn't belong here." The officer glanced between them, uncertainty flashing across his face. Karen knew how to play this game, loud enough to sound convincing, confident enough to push her lie, and arrogant enough to believe nobody would dare challenge her. Marcus breathed in deeply, his eyes locked on the blinking lights. This wasn't new. This wasn't even surprising. But that didn't mean it didn't burn. The cop asked for ID. Marcus calmly reached into his wallet, pulled out his driver's license, and handed it over. His name, his address, everything clear. The officer studied it, then looked back at Karen, then at Marcus. "Ma'am," the officer said carefully, "this ID says he lives here." Karen rolled her eyes, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Forged. Don't you see? People like him know how to play the system. He doesn't belong here, officer. Look at him. Look at that truck. This is a multi-million-dollar neighborhood. Do you really think someone like him owns this land?" The words sliced through the night. Someone like him. Marcus felt the sting, not because he believed her, but because he'd heard it all before, in schools, in boardrooms, on sidewalks where he was stopped for simply walking. But tonight was different. Tonight, Karen had no idea who she was messing with. Marcus stared at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He could have ended it right there. He could have dropped the truth in a single sentence, and everything would have shifted. But instead, he let the silence linger, let Karen drown in her own arrogance. The officer hesitated, sensing the tension. "Sir, I think we need to sort this out at the station just to be safe." Karen's smirk widened. "Good idea. Maybe once he's in custody, we can finally get our neighborhood back under control." Marcus bent down, picked up his duffel bag, and slowly placed it over his shoulder. He nodded once, calm, collected, as though this wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated. He turned to Karen, studied her face, and then whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "You really don't know who you're talking to." Karen blinked, caught off guard, but quickly brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, please. Just another squatter trying to play tough. You'll be gone by tomorrow." But she was wrong. So wrong. Because Marcus wasn't just a ranch owner. He wasn't just another man coming home to his land. Marcus was the man who oversaw every homeowners association in the United States. And Karen? Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The ride in the back of the police cruiser was quiet, except for the faint hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the radio. Marcus sat with his hands resting on his knees, his face calm but unreadable, as though he'd already thought 10 steps ahead of everyone in the car. The officers didn't handcuff him, but their eyes kept flicking back to the rearview mirror, suspicious, uncertain. Karen had stood proudly in the driveway as they pulled off, waving her little victory like a flag in the wind. She didn't know she was celebrating her own downfall. At the station, Marcus was led into a holding room. White walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs. They asked him to wait. He did, setting his duffel bag at his feet and folding his arms. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't angry. He'd learned a long time ago that anger only gave people like Karen what they wanted. Time passed slowly, but eventually, a young officer walked in with a clipboard. He looked nervous. "Mr. Reed, we ran your license. Everything checks out. The property is yours," he hesitated before adding. "You're free to go." Marcus stood, adjusting his jacket. "And the woman who made the call?" he asked, his voice smooth, even. The officer glanced down, uncomfortable. "She said you were suspicious. We have to respond to those calls, you understand." Marcus looked him straight in the eye. "Suspicious of what? Coming home?" The officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Marcus picked up his duffel, walked out of the station, and headed toward his truck. The night air was cool, carrying with it the smell of damp earth. He slid behind the wheel, his fingers tapping the steering wheel as the engine roared to life. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the road ahead. This wasn't new, not to him. But this time wasn't going to end the way Karen thought it would. No, this time, there would be consequences. The following morning, Karen was already bragging to her friends at the whole clubhouse. "You should have seen it," she said, sipping her latte with exaggerated flair. "Police lights, the whole thing. I told them, people like him don't belong in a place like this. Mark my words, that ranch will be cleaned up and sold by the end of the month." Her friends nodded, some too polite to disagree, others too timid to call her out. Karen thrived on their silence, mistaking it for support. The double doors of the clubhouse creaked open then, and conversation died instantly. Marcus walked in. His presence filled the room, quiet but commanding. His boots clicked against the polished floor as he moved with unhurried steps, carrying himself like someone who belonged, not just here, but anywhere he set foot. Karen's jaw dropped. "What are you doing here?" Marcus stopped at the center of the room, his eyes sweeping across the faces staring back at him. "I live here," he said simply. "This is my ranch. Always has been." Karen laughed, though her voice cracked. "We'll see about that. You won't last. The Ho doesn't tolerate people breaking rules." Marcus tilted his head, studying her the way a teacher studies a stubborn student. Then he said, almost casually, "Funny thing about that, I actually know a lot about HOAs. More than you think." Karen crossed her arms, forcing a smug smile. "Oh, do you? Then you should know I'm president of this Ho, and I run things here." The room went silent again. Marcus's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know exactly who you are." Karen blinked, thrown off for just a second before regaining her composure. "Then you know it's only a matter of time before we vote you out. You don't fit the standards. You don't belong." Marcus leaned in just a fraction, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. "You really want to play this game?" Her confidence wavered, just for a flicker, but she masked it with another scoff. "I always win." Marcus straightened, gave her one long look, then turned to leave. The room remained tense, the kind of silence that sticks even after someone's gone. Karen thought she'd scared him off. She thought she'd won again. But what she didn't know, what nobody in that clubhouse knew, was that Marcus Reed wasn't just some ranch owner. He was the director of the National Ho Oversight Committee. And soon, every move Karen made was about to backfire in ways she couldn't imagine. Karen didn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned, replaying Marcus's words in her head. The way he had looked at her, calm, steady, like a man who wasn't afraid of her threats, unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Still, by morning she was back to her usual self, convinced she had the upper hand. She strutted down the cul-de-sac with a clipboard in hand, tapping her pen against the paper like a drum roll before war. She had a plan. If she couldn't scare Marcus away, she'd drown him in fines and violations until he couldn't breathe. That was the whole way. She started with a list. Fence too tall. Truck parked in the driveway overnight. Barn paint, not Ho approved. Grass too long by 1 inch. Suspicious livestock activity near the back pasture. Karen smiled as she scribbled each one down. She didn't need truth. She didn't even need evidence. All she needed was her voice and her friends who were too scared to challenge her. By afternoon, a thick envelope stuffed with violation notices sat on Marcus's porch. Karen watched from behind her blinds as he returned from town, carrying 2 sacks of feed and a bag of groceries. He saw the envelope, picked it up, and opened it right there on the steps. His eyes scanned the pages slowly, his face as unreadable as ever. Karen grinned. "Let's see how calm you are now." But Marcus didn't crumble. He didn't even frown. He tucked the papers neatly back into the envelope, walked inside, and closed the door behind him. That was it. No anger, no argument, no shouting match, just silence. That silence bothered Karen more than if he'd yelled. The next day, Marcus was up early, walking the fence line of his ranch. He inspected the posts, ran his hand along the wood, checked on the horses grazing in the pasture. His truck sat in the driveway, his boots left prints in the dirt, and his barn door was open wide to let in the morning light. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't apologizing. He was living. Meanwhile, Karen gathered her closest allies in the clubhouse. 5 neighbors sat around the glossy oak table, sipping coffee nervously as she launched into her speech. "We can't let him stay," Karen declared, slapping the clipboard down like a judge with a gavel. "If we don't enforce the rules, this whole neighborhood will go downhill. First, it's trucks in the driveway, then it's loud parties, then it's, well, you know how these things spiral." One neighbor, Mrs. Thomas, cleared her throat. "But Karen, his property looks fine to me. He keeps it clean. His horses are beautiful. I don't see the harm." Karen's eyes narrowed. "That's because you're not thinking long term. People like him change everything. He's not our kind of neighbor." The words hung in the air. Nobody responded. Karen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "If we don't stand together, he'll run this place over. Trust me. I know how these people work." Uncomfortable silence filled the room. Back at the ranch, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, professional, but sharp as steel. "Yes," he said. "I received the violation notices. Yes, I'm aware of the so-called infractions." He paused, listening. "What's interesting is that the whole bylaws for this community were updated last year. Section 14, Article 3. Driveway parking is allowed for vehicles registered to the property owner. Section 7. Fences up to 8 feet are permitted. Section 9. Barns do not require whole paint approval if they're original structures." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing just slightly. "So, here's what I need you to do. Pull every record of violation notices issued in this neighborhood for the past 3 years. Compare them to the bylaws. Send me everything you find. I'll handle the rest." He ended the call and closed the laptop. His reflection stared back at him in the darkened screen, calm, focused, prepared. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something bigger. Later that evening, Karen walked her little dog past Marcus's property, just to see if he caved. To her annoyance, he was outside again, stacking hay bales with slow precision, the kind of work that required strength and patience. He didn't even look up as she passed, didn't acknowledge her presence. Her dog barked, pulling at the leash. Karen sneered. "Don't get too comfortable, cowboy. The board has ways of dealing with stubborn types like you." Marcus finally turned his head, meeting her eyes across the fence. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You should be careful, Karen." Her face twisted in mock laughter. "Careful? Of what, you?" Marcus set down the hay bale, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped closer to the fence. His eyes held hers, steady and unshaken. "Careful about the games you're playing. You don't know the rules as well as you think you do." Karen froze for a moment, her dog tugging impatiently at the leash. She forced a smile, rolled her eyes, and walked away. But inside, something unsettled her. Marcus wasn't bluffing. She could feel it in the way he spoke, in the way he carried himself. And she hated that feeling, because for the first time, Karen realized she might not be the one in control. By the end of the week, Karen had turned the neighborhood into a war zone. Flyers were slipped under doors warning of declining property values. Emails were sent out with subject lines like urgent, protect our standards. Every line dripped with the same coded message: Marcus didn't belong. She even called an emergency whole board meeting. Word spread fast, and by evening the clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, the smell of coffee and nervous sweat filling the air. Karen stood at the front like a general before her army, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice rising above the low murmur of conversation. "As you've seen, we have a problem in this neighborhood. A serious one. A man has moved onto the ranch property who does not respect our rules, our standards, or our way of life. We cannot allow this to continue." A few heads nodded. Some frowned. Most just sat stiffly, not wanting to be noticed. Karen pounced on the silence. "If we don't act now, our property values will plummet. Our community will lose its reputation. And I, for one, am not going to stand by while that happens." The door opened then, and the room fell quiet. Marcus stepped in, tall, calm, carrying a leather folder under his arm. His boots echoed against the floor as he walked to the front. He didn't ask permission. He didn't hesitate. He just stood there, across from Karen, and set his folder down on the table. "You're talking about me," he said simply. Karen stiffened. "This is a private board meeting." Marcus's voice was steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I live here. I received the notices. I have every right to be here." Karen's lips curled into a tight smile. "Fine. Then let's hear what you have to say." Marcus opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents, crisp and organized. He laid them on the table one by one, each paper sliding neatly into place. "These," he said, "are the bylaws of this community, updated last year. Every violation notice you sent me, invalid. Every claim you made, false. And here," he tapped another paper, "are the state statutes governing homeowners associations. Did you know this hoe has already racked up 3 warnings for improper enforcement of rules?" Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "That's irrelevant. This board has the right to enforce standards as we see fit." Marcus's eyes locked on hers, steady and unblinking. "Not when those standards are applied selectively. Not when they're used as weapons. That's called discrimination." The room went dead silent. Karen's face flushed. "You can't prove that." Marcus pulled out another sheet, this one thicker, stamped with a seal. "Actually, I can. I requested violation records for the last 3 years. Out of over 200 notices issued, do you know how many were sent to homeowners who look like me?" He paused, letting the silence stretch. 73%. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Eyes shifted away from Karen, some in shame, some in anger. Karen's voice cracked for the first time. "You're twisting the numbers." "That's not." Marcus stepped closer, his presence filling the room without raising his voice. "I know exactly what this is, and I've seen it in communities across this country. People hiding behind standards when what they really mean is control. People calling the police when they see someone they don't think belongs. People like you, Karen." Her face tightened, but she forced a laugh, sharp and brittle. "You talk a big game, but you're just one man. What power do you really think you have here?" Marcus studied her for a long moment. His answer was calm, deliberate, heavy. "More than you know." The crowd leaned in, caught between shock and curiosity. Karen crossed her arms, trying to mask her unease. "We'll see about that. The board will vote. And trust me, they'll side with me." Marcus gathered his papers slowly, sliding them back into the folder. "Vote however you want. Just make sure you're ready for what comes after." He turned, walking out of the clubhouse without another word. The room erupted in whispers. Karen stood frozen, her face flushed, her hands trembling ever so slightly. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she'd already lost, because deep down, she sensed it. Marcus wasn't bluffing. He was holding back. And when he finally revealed the truth, everything she built her power on would crumble. Karen sat at her kitchen island with a glass of wine in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling furiously through emails from neighbors. Some supported her, whispering fears about changing the neighborhood, but others questioned her, asking why Marcus's violations didn't match the bylaws he'd cited. A few even admitted they respected him. That stung more than anything else. Respect was her currency. Without it, she had nothing. She took another sip, ignoring the bitter taste. Marcus had embarrassed her in front of everyone, and worse, he had done it with facts, not emotion. That meant he was dangerous. Facts lasted, facts spread. By morning, Karen launched her counterattack. She filed a formal petition with the whole board, demanding a special hearing to review the residency and compliance of Marcus Reed. She plastered notices on the clubhouse doors, slipped flyers into mailboxes, and even posted a rant on the neighborhood Facebook group. Neighbors, we are under threat. If we don't protect our standards now, we will lose everything we worked for. One person is trying to undermine our community, and we cannot let it happen. Marcus saw the flyer on his gatepost when he returned from the feed store. He read it slowly, then folded it neatly and tucked it into his pocket. He didn't shake his head. He didn't laugh. He just kept walking, his boots crunching against the gravel. Inside, his phone buzzed. He answered without hesitation. "Yeah, it's moving faster now," he said. "She's calling a special hearing. She thinks she can force me out." He paused, listening. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No, don't step in yet. Let her keep digging. The deeper she goes, the harder it'll hit when the truth comes out." That night, Karen prepared like she was going into battle. She rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror, adjusted her blazer, and even color-coded her binders. She was going to crush Marcus with sheer force of presentation. The hearing drew the largest crowd the Hoe had ever seen. People crammed into the clubhouse, their voices buzzing with tension. Karen stood at the front again, her binders stacked like weapons, her eyes sharp with determination. Marcus entered a few minutes later, calm as ever, leather folder in hand. He nodded politely to the crowd, then took a seat near the front. He didn't posture. He didn't try to dominate the room. He just sat, quiet, patient, watchful. Karen launched into her speech. "Neighbors, we are gathered here tonight to protect what matters most: our homes, our community, our standards. Mr. Reed has violated multiple rules and shown blatant disregard for the way of life we built here." She flipped pages dramatically, listing supposed violations again. Fence height, driveway parking, barn paint, livestock. Her voice rose, her gestures sharp, her tone dripping with certainty. But as she spoke, a strange shift rippled through the crowd. People glanced at each other. They'd heard these claims before, and they remembered how Marcus had dismantled them line by line. Marcus let her finish. He didn't interrupt once. When she finally slammed her binder shut and declared, "This is why he must go," the silence was heavy. Then Marcus stood. He walked slowly to the front, his boots echoing. He set his folder on the table, opened it, and spread out documents for everyone to see. "These are the bylaws," he said. "These are the state statutes. And these," he tapped a thicker packet, "are records of every violation notice issued in this neighborhood for the last 3 years. I had them audited. And what do they show? That enforcement isn't about rules. It's about who the board chooses to target." He turned toward the crowd, his voice steady, each word weighted with truth. "You've seen it yourselves. Neighbors parking trucks in their driveways without consequence. Fences taller than mine. Barns painted colors not on the Hoe approved list. But none of those homeowners got violation notices." The crowd stirred, whispers growing louder. Marcus's eyes locked on Karen. "Except me. Except the family who moved in 3 years ago and lasted only 6 months. Except the couple down the street who mysteriously sold after a year of constant fines." Karen's face flushed red. "You're twisting this. That's not how it happened." Marcus leaned in just slightly, his voice calm but sharp. "Then explain why 73% of violations were issued to homeowners of color in a neighborhood where we make up less than 10% of the population." The room fell silent. The weight of his words pressed down on everyone present. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her binder, her charts, her color-coded tabs. Suddenly, they all looked small, flimsy, weak. Marcus gathered his papers, sliding them back into his folder with the same deliberate calm he'd shown from the start. Then he looked at the board members directly. You can keep pretending this is about fences and paint colors, or you can admit what it really is. The room buzzed, neighbors shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Some looked angry, not at Marcus, but at Karen. Others looked ashamed. Marcus turned to leave, his boots echoing again against the floor. Before he reached the door, he paused, looked back, and said quietly, "You've pushed me far enough. Now, it's my turn." He walked out, leaving Karen frozen in front of her binders, her power slipping through her fingers. For the first time, she was afraid, not of losing control of the whole, but of what Marcus might be about to do, because deep down, she knew he hadn't played his biggest card yet. The morning after the hearing, Karen sat at her dining table surrounded by binders, papers, and an untouched cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from neighbors, but she didn't answer. Too many of them were questions she couldn't face. Is it true about the statistics? Why didn't you tell us? Were we really targeting only certain people? Her authority was slipping, but she clung to the belief that Marcus was bluffing. He had to be. Nobody could pull violation records for the whole neighborhood unless they had serious connections. And what he'd hinted at last night, "It's my turn now," echoed in her head like a storm building in the distance. By late afternoon, a black SUV pulled up to the ranch. Karen spotted it from her kitchen window. Two men in dark suits stepped out, carrying briefcases, their postures straight, their faces unreadable. They weren't salesmen. They weren't realtors. They were official. Karen's pulse quickened. She slipped on her jacket and hurried down the street, pretending to walk her dog, but really circling closer. She stopped at the edge of Marcus's fence, pretending to adjust the leash while straining to hear. Marcus met the men at the porch. They shook hands like old colleagues, like equals. One handed Marcus a folder thick with documents, stamped with federal seals. Karen's stomach twisted. Who is he? That evening, the truth began to crack through the surface. A letter was sent to every homeowner in the neighborhood, delivered by courier. Each envelope bore an official seal and contained a single-page notice. Effective immediately, the National Home Oversight Committee has opened a formal investigation into the Fairview Estates Homeowners Association for repeated violations of state and federal housing laws. The investigation will be led by Director Marcus Reed. The neighborhood erupted. Phones rang nonstop, neighbors huddled in driveways whispering. Social media lit up with posts. Wait, he's not just some ranch guy. He's in charge of the oversight committee? At the clubhouse, a group of board members cornered Karen. Their voices were sharp, accusing. You didn't tell us he was connected at that level. Do you realize what you've done? He oversees every hoe in the country. We're finished. Karen tried to defend herself, her voice trembling despite her efforts to steady it. He never said who he was. How was I supposed to know? But her words sounded hollow, even to her. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the letter in front of him. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the wide, open land he'd fought to protect. His phone buzzed again, calls from colleagues, updates from the investigation team. He answered one. Yes, start with the financials. I want every dollar tracked. If there are discrepancies, we'll find them. His tone was calm, but firm, like a man carrying the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Later that evening, a knock echoed at his door. When he opened it, Karen stood there, her dog tugging nervously at the leash, her face pale and drawn. You, she began, her voice cracking. She swallowed hard. You tricked me. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I didn't trick you. I told you to be careful. You didn't listen. Her eyes darted away, shame flickering across her face before hardening into anger. You could have told me who you were. He leaned against the doorframe, his voice steady. And if I had, you'd have treated me differently. That's the point, Karen. People like you only respect power. You don't respect people. She flinched, like his words had landed heavier than she expected. I didn't know, she whispered. Marcus' gaze didn't soften. You didn't care to know. That's worse. For a moment, the silence between them was heavier than the words they'd spoken. Then Marcus closed the door gently, leaving Karen on the porch, her dog whining softly at her feet. As she walked back to her house, neighbors' eyes followed her from behind curtains and porches. Her power was gone, and in its place was something she'd never felt in this neighborhood before: fear. Because now, she wasn't the one holding the clipboard. Now, Marcus Reed was in charge. The shock didn't fade, it spread. By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with fear and curiosity. Marcus Reed wasn't just the man Karen tried to push out. He was the man who had the power to tear their entire home apart. The investigation moved quickly. Teams in suits and ties showed up at the clubhouse carrying boxes, scanners, and laptops. They carted away binders filled with financial records, minutes from meetings, and violation logs. They spoke in clipped tones, asking for signatures and access codes. The neighborhood watched as the fortress Karen once ruled over became ground zero for exposure. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones on sidewalks. Did you see them take the files? I heard there's money missing. Karen's finished. Karen herself barely left her house. She sat at her kitchen window, watching the black SUVs roll in and out of the neighborhood like vultures circling. Her once loyal allies avoided her now, their eyes darting away when she tried to wave. Even her closest board members stopped returning her calls. One evening, she mustered the courage to walk to Marcus's ranch. She stood outside the fence, clutching the leash of her little dog, her pride shattered but her desperation boiling over. You're destroying everything, she called out as Marcus fed his horses, the golden sunset casting his shadow long across the pasture. He turned slowly, calm as always, and leaned against the fence. No, Karen, I'm holding you accountable. You think you're some kind of hero? She snapped. You're ruining this neighborhood. Marcus studied her for a moment before answering. This neighborhood was already ruined. People just didn't want to see it. But when rules are used as weapons, when neighbors are targeted because of who they are instead of what they've done, that's not community. That's control. And you were the one pulling the strings. Karen's lips trembled, but she fought to keep her voice sharp. I was protecting standards, protecting home values. Protecting what? Marcus's tone deepened, his words heavy. Your power? Your comfort? Your illusion of control? You called the cops on me for stepping onto my own land. Do you even hear how wrong that is? Her eyes darted away, shame creeping in, but pride held her tongue. She turned and stormed back down the street, neighbors peeking from windows as she passed. For the first time, she didn't look powerful. She looked small. Meanwhile, the investigation unearthed damning truths. Thousands of dollars misused from whole funds. Selective enforcement of rules documented in cold. Undeniable numbers. A pattern of targeting certain families. Fines, threats, harassment, until they sold and left. One night, the clubhouse filled again. This time not for Karen's speeches, but for the federal auditor's findings. The lead investigator stood before the packed room, his voice measured. Our review shows serious mismanagement and discrimination in this hoe. These findings will be forwarded to the State Attorney General's office. Leadership of the board will be temporarily suspended until further notice. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors turned toward Karen, who sat stiffly in the second row, her face pale, her hands clenching the armrests of her chair. Marcus stood quietly in the back, his presence calm but commanding. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just listened, his eyes steady, his shoulders square. Afterward, as neighbors poured out of the clubhouse, some approached him cautiously. One older man cleared his throat. Mr. Reed, I just wanted to say, thank you. I didn't realize how bad it was until now. Marcus nodded. It's never easy to see the truth when you've been living inside it. But real communities don't survive on fear. They survive on fairness. The man's eyes softened, and he extended his hand. Marcus shook it firmly. Across the lot, Karen stormed out, ignoring the whispers and stares. Her once loyal followers had abandoned her, leaving her alone in the cold night air. But deep down, she wasn't finished. Karen was stubborn, and stubbornness had always been her weapon. She still believed she could claw her way back, somehow. She didn't realize yet that Marcus wasn't done either, because justice hadn't been fully served. Not yet. The weeks that followed felt like someone had ripped the mask off the neighborhood. For years, Karen's presence loomed over every barbecue, every yard sale, every holiday decoration. People used to whisper, "Better not let Karen see that, or Karen won't approve." But now, with the board suspended and the investigation in full swing, her name wasn't spoken with fear anymore. It was spoken with contempt. Marcus noticed the shift one quiet Saturday morning. He was repairing a section of his ranch fence when two neighbors he'd rarely spoken to walked over carrying fresh coffee and homemade muffins. They looked nervous, but determined. "We just wanted to stop by," one of them said, "to welcome you back, officially." Marcus raised an eyebrow, setting down his hammer. "Welcome me back? Thought I'd been here all along." The woman laughed awkwardly, then sighed. "You have, but we didn't do right by you. None of us did. We let Karen run this place into the ground while she singled you out. And we stayed quiet." Her husband nodded in agreement. "We were scared, but that doesn't excuse it. We're sorry." Marcus studied them. Their words weren't slick or rehearsed. They were raw and genuine. He nodded slowly. "Appreciate that. Takes courage to admit it." For the first time, the ranch didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a bridge. Neighbors started coming by, offering help, dropping off pies, even just stopping to chat. The walls Karen built between people were crumbling, but Karen herself wasn't done fighting. Every morning, she walked her dog in circles around the clubhouse, muttering into her phone about lawyers and rights. She posted angry rants online, claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign. Some folks still avoided her, others mocked her, but Marcus, he just watched. He knew people like her. Pride was their last shield, even when the truth stripped everything else away. One chilly evening, the neighborhood gathered again. This time, Marcus was invited to speak, not as an investigator, not as an overseer, but as a neighbor. The community center buzzed with uneasy energy as he stepped up to the front. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. He simply looked out at the faces, some familiar, some distant, some ashamed, and spoke. "When I first came back to my ranch," he began, his voice steady, "I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for peace, for space to breathe, to reconnect with land that's been in my family for generations. But what I found was hostility. Not because I broke rules, not because I disrespected anyone, but because I didn't fit the picture some people wanted for this community." The room was silent, every word landing heavy. HOAs were never meant to be weapons. They were meant to be safeguards, to help neighbors live together in harmony. But when they're abused, when rules become chains instead of guidelines, they do more harm than good. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "This isn't just about me. It's about the families who sold their homes under pressure. The ones who got fined into submission. The ones who stayed silent because they didn't want trouble." This investigation exposed more than corruption. It exposed how easy it is to let fear run a neighborhood. A murmur spread, people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus softened his tone. "But it doesn't have to stay that way. You've got a chance to rebuild, to choose fairness over fear, respect over control, and maybe to actually know your neighbors, not just police them." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then an elderly woman in the back stood up. Her hands shook, but her voice was strong. "I lost my grandson because of this hoe. He couldn't take the harassment anymore. He left town. I haven't seen him in 3 years. I wish I had stood up sooner, but I didn't, and I can't change that. What I can do is promise to be better, to be braver." Tears filled her eyes, and several people nodded in agreement. Others bowed their heads. Karen, sitting near the front, shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous. He's manipulating all of you. He's making himself out to be a saint when he's the one tearing this place apart. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, his voice calm but unyielding. Karen, nobody tore this place apart but you. And now, everyone can see it. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. It wasn't loud or wild. It was steady, a wave of release, like chains falling from the air itself. Karen's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing as if to protest. But she couldn't speak over the clapping. Not this time. Marcus stepped back from the podium, his work unfinished, but his point made. Justice was already reshaping the soil beneath their feet. Still, he knew this story wasn't over, because justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. And the hardest part of all, the part Karen never understood, was learning how to heal a community once it's been broken. The applause still echoed in Marcus's ears long after he left the community center that night. It wasn't the kind of applause you hear at a show or a sports game. It was heavier, raw, like something had cracked open inside those people. For years, they'd been swallowing silence, and now the sound of their clapping was like a collective exhale. But Marcus knew applause was only the beginning. A speech didn't heal a community. Action did. The following days brought a new rhythm to the neighborhood. Instead of Karen's constant patrols and scolding emails, people were knocking on each other's doors again. Families who barely exchanged hellos before were now organizing cleanups, fixing fences together, even planning a fall festival. It wasn't perfect, but the air felt lighter. Still, Marcus could sense the unease. Without an Hobart, the neighborhood was floating. Folks worried about what came next. Who would lead? Who would keep things fair? That question followed him everywhere. Down the grocery aisle, across the church pew, even while walking his land. Neighbors kept stopping him. You've got the experience. We trust you. You should run the new board. Marcus always smiled politely, shaking his head. That's not my role. My job is oversight, not control. I'm here to make sure no one ever abuses power again. But the board, that's yours to choose. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fiery streaks, Marcus sat on his porch with his old friend, Harold. They shared a quiet drink, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the background. You know they want you to lead, Harold said, breaking the silence. Marcus took a slow sip, staring out at the horizon. Yeah, but if I step in, they'll always depend on me. That's not real change. Real change is when they find the strength to lead themselves. Harold chuckled. Always the teacher. But you can't deny, you've sparked something here. Marcus tilted his head, considering. Maybe, but it's not about me. It's about the soil. You can plant good seeds, but if the ground's poisoned, nothing grows. My job is to heal the ground. Meanwhile, Karen's world continued to unravel. She filed complaints, hired a lawyer, even tried to rally a few holdouts to support her. But with every attempt, the community pushed back harder. Meetings she called went unattended. Letters she posted were torn down within hours. For the first time in years, her voice wasn't the loudest. One afternoon, Marcus watched from his porch as Karen marched angrily down the street, dragging her dog behind her. A group of kids were chalk drawing on the sidewalk, something she would have fined their parents for before. But this time, she stopped, glared, and kept walking. No one moved aside. No one looked scared. That was the true shift. Fear was gone. But the biggest moment came 2 weeks later, when the state's investigation results arrived. A town hall-style meeting was called. The place was packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with anticipation. The state official stood at the front, folder in hand. After a full review, the findings are clear. The previous whole board violated numerous state laws, engaged in discriminatory practices, and misused community funds. Effective immediately, the old board is permanently dissolved. Karen will be barred from holding any Ho office in the state of Texas ever again. The room erupted. Cheers, claps, even tears. Karen sat stone-faced, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. But it was no use. The power she once clung to had vanished. Then the official continued. We're ordering a new board election. But before we close, we want to acknowledge one person. Without Marcus Hall's diligence and oversight, this corruption may never have come to light. What many of you don't know is that Mr. Hall is not just your neighbor. He oversees compliance for every hoe in the United States. His role is to protect homeowners nationwide from the exact abuse you've experienced. Gasps filled the room. People turned to Marcus, wide-eyed. He hadn't hidden his role, but he hadn't flaunted it either. Now it was out in the open. Karen's jaw dropped. What? That's impossible, she shrieked. But the official nodded firmly. It's very possible, and it's the truth. The neighbors stared at Marcus with a mixture of awe and gratitude. A young mother stood up, holding her toddler close. You mean you were always watching out for us? Marcus stood slowly, his voice calm. Not just you. Every neighborhood. Every family who deserves fairness, respect, and peace in their own homes. That's my work. But this victory, that's yours. Because you chose to open your eyes. You chose to take back your voice. The applause came again, louder than before. People crowded around him afterward, shaking his hand, hugging him, thanking him. For the first time in years, this neighborhood felt like a community, not a cage. Karen slipped out the back door. Her reign ended. Her power nothing more than a memory. That night, Marcus walked his land under the stars. He felt the weight of history pressing down, the struggles his ancestors endured just to hold onto land, the battles fought for dignity and freedom. And now, here he was, standing tall on soil that carried both pain and promise. This wasn't just about his ranch. It wasn't just about one hoe. It was about something bigger, reclaiming spaces where Black voices had been silenced, where fear had ruled. And now, with the truth revealed, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. The morning after the town hall, Marcus woke before sunrise. The ranch was quiet. The fields stretched wide and golden in the early light. He saddled his horse, not for show, not for power, but for peace. As he rode across the land, he felt the silence settle deep inside him. For the first time since returning, it wasn't the silence of isolation. It was the silence of freedom. Word of what happened in the meeting had spread beyond the neighborhood. Local news stations had already picked it up, running headlines about the hoe abuse scandal and the federal overseer who lived right under their noses. Marcus didn't seek attention, but he knew what this meant. His community wasn't just free, it had become an example. At the diner in town that afternoon, people nodded at him. Some even clapped him on the back. One older gentleman leaned in and whispered, "You didn't just fix a neighborhood, son. You gave people hope they don't have to be pushed around anymore." Marcus smiled, humble but steady. That's the point. No one deserves to live in fear where they lay their head. Back in the neighborhood, things were shifting fast. Committees were forming. Neighbors were volunteering for roles. Instead of Karen's one-woman rule, there was shared leadership, open doors, and decisions made in the sunlight. Kids played in the streets without fear of fines. Families sat on their porches without wondering if a petty complaint would ruin their evening. The place was finally becoming what it should have always been, a home. And Karen? She had vanished from sight. Her house went on the market. A for sale sign staked firmly in the yard. Folks drove by without pity. Some shook their heads, others shrugged. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Justice had already spoken. One evening, the neighborhood hosted its first community cookout in years. Music filled the air. Smoke from grills curled into the sky, and laughter carried down the streets. Marcus stood quietly at the edge, a plate in his hand, watching children chase each other through the grass. A young father walked up to him. "I'll be honest, Marcus," he said. "Before all this, I didn't even talk to half the people on this block. I just kept my head down. But you reminded us we deserve more." Marcus nodded, his voice low but firm. "That's the thing about silence. It protects you in the short run, but it starves you in the long run. You all found your voice. That's something no one can take away now." Later that night, As the cookout wound down, the neighbors gathered in a circle around a fire pit. They invited Marcus to speak. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, his face glowing in the firelight. "My grandfather used to say something I'll never forget," Marcus began. "Land is more than dirt. It's memory. It's where your children learn their first steps, where your family builds a life, where you should feel safe enough to dream. That's why I came back here. Not just to live on this ranch, but to make sure none of us ever forget that this land, this community, it belongs to the people who love it. Not to fear, not to greed, and definitely not to control." The crowd was silent, every eye on him. Marcus's voice softened, carrying weight with each word. "I don't oversee HOAs because I like paperwork. I do it because I know what it feels like to have your dignity questioned. I know what it's like to walk into a room and be treated like you don't belong. But I'm telling you now, our belonging isn't up for debate. Not here. Not anywhere." The fire crackled, and someone whispered, "Amen." Marcus looked around the circle, his eyes steady. "You stood up. You fought back. That's bigger than me, bigger than this street. That's a message for every neighborhood in this country. Your voice matters. Your peace matters. And when someone tries to strip that away, stand tall, stand together. Because when you do, justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable." Applause broke out, not loud and frenzied, but strong and united, like a heartbeat. Families pulled closer. Kids leaned against their parents. Even the elders nodded, eyes glistening. As the night ended and people drifted home, Marcus stayed by the fire alone for a while, staring into the embers. He thought about his grandfather, about all the men and women before him who had fought battles just to hold onto what was theirs. He thought about the generations to come, and the importance of leaving more than just land, leaving an example. Finally, he rose, dusted himself off, and walked back toward his ranch. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, spread wide across the Texas sky. He smiled to himself, not because Karen was gone, not because the neighborhood had changed, but because dignity had won. And in the quiet of the night, Marcus Hall knew that was the kind of victory no one could ever take away.